They were still chewing when she said it. Her fork barely touched the edge of the plate. The table was full roast chicken, green beans, fat, watery salad they always made when I came over. Like I didn't notice the difference. But I wasn't. Even halfway through my first bite when the words dropped. Don't embarrass us at dinner. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Her eyes had that sheen they get when she's performing for someone, especially for my son. Her voice had the same smoothness she uses when she's speaking to a waiter or the bank. I just looked down at the mashed potatoes, let the fork rest in my lap. I wasn't chewing anymore. I heard my grandson laugh at something across the table, and for a moment I pretended I hadn't heard her. Pretended the words hadn't landed where they did in the pit of my stomach, like something rotten I couldn't spit out. The worst part. My son didn't say anything. He didn't ask her what she meant. He didn't look at me, didn't touch my arm, didn't deflect it with one of his nervous jokes. He just kept cutting his meat. I stayed a few more minutes, ate slowly, small bites, though my throat had started to tighten. Someone asked me something about the weather. I nodded, said it was chilly. So the baby cried. They passed him around. Life kept going, even after something sacred had been broken. When I excused myself, no one stopped me. I picked up my purse, walked past the coat rack without touching it. The hallway light buzzed faintly, and I remembered how my son used to ask me to hold his hand in the dark. That was a long time ago. The cold air hit my face like a second slap. I stood by the car for a while before I unlocked it. Just breathed. Watched the neighbor's porch light flicker. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even turn on the radio when I drove back to the apartment. I sat in the kitchen for over an hour. In the dark, coat still on. The chair creaked under me like it was shifting away too. I kept hearing her voice. Don't embarrass us. Like I was something to hide. Hey, wrinkle in their picture-perfect life. It's a reminder of something they'd rather not include. Like I had done something shameful by simply existing in their space. She always said things with a smile, the cruelest people do. And my son. The silence from him was louder than anything else in that room. That's the part I kept replaying. His silence. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay on top of the covers with the lamp on. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back at that table. Back in that exact moment where I realized I wasn't one of them anymore. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time and I just hadn't noticed. But that night, I noticed. And once you see something clearly, it's hard to unsee it. When my son first brought her home, I remember how tightly he held her hand, like he needed her to steady him. She had this laugh that filled the room too quickly. I told myself it was nerves. I made tea. Put out the good cups. It's the ones with the faded blue flowers. He used to call them grandma cups when he was small, but now they were delicate. Vintage. She didn't touch hers. I offered cake. She said she was watching her sugar. I offered stories. She offered silence, but she smiled a lot like she was being polite through a window. Still, I tried. I always tried when they got married. I made their bedspread by hand. Tiny stitches that bruised my fingers. I wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with twine. She said thank you and put it in the guest room. I saw it there months later, folded too neatly, unused. I never asked why after the baby was born. I offered to stay for a few weeks, help with laundry, hold the baby while they slept. She told me they had it covered, said the baby needed calm and too many people would overwhelm him. I nodded and dropped off casseroles instead. She didn't like onions, or garlic, or too much salt. I started cooking plain things, boiled chicken, white rice, food that had no voice. My son started changing too, slowly, like sand being swept from under your feet. First it was phone calls getting shorter, then birthdays with no card, then visits where I had to remind him of things he once remembered. On his own, I noticed he never looked me in the eye when she was around. As if my presence made him smaller. And Stella stayed quiet. I made sure their gifts were wrapped in gold paper with blue ribbons, her favorite colors. I remembered their anniversary. I baked for the baby's first birthday and stood by the window while they took family pictures without me. I was always just behind the curtain, just outside the frame. I began to shrink inside myself. Not all at once, it happened slowly. You start measuring your words. You start thinking, maybe I talk too much. Maybe I offer too much. Maybe I love too loudly. So you soften. You fold yourself in. You tell yourself it's just a season. That love doesn't always come back in the way you give it. But it will return eventually. But it didn't. I remember one Thanksgiving. They sat me at the end of the table by the high chair. Not enough room on the other side, she said, even though there was space. I watched them toast each other and pass dishes over me. I laughed when they laughed, told myself not to mind. But that night in the car, I wept into my steering wheel. My son called once, months later, to ask for my biscuit recipe. Said she wanted it for a brunch. He never called again to say if they turned out well. And still I stayed, because mothers wait. That's what we do. We wait by doors, by phones, by windows that stay shut. We wait in silence, thinking maybe they'll remember. Why, maybe they'll come back different. But every time I stepped into that house, it was as if I had to earn my way in, like I was applying for the role of grandmother. Like I was being reviewed. She always said things like, "We're trying a new parenting style. I hope you understand." Or, "Things are different now. We read a lot about boundaries." Or, "It's just not how we do things," as if everything I had ever done was wrong. Sometimes I wondered if he told her about the nights I held him through fevers. Or the year I worked double shifts to keep the lights on. Or how I sewed his prom suit because he wanted to feel handsome. But we couldn't afford one. Maybe he did. Maybe she just didn't care. Maybe he forgot. I used to think it was enough to be kind, that if I just kept being gentle, they would soften. 2. That silence could be a bridge, not a wall. But silence only stretched the distance. I began writing things down. Small things, dates, words. The time she told me not to bring sweets, then served cake from her friend. The way he once introduced me as just his mother, like I was a faded chapter in a book he no longer wanted to open. I started keeping a notebook. Nothing dramatic, it's just the truth. Because truth, when written down, becomes something you can't ignore. The last visit before that dinner, I brought a toy for the baby, a wooden train. She looked at it and said, "We're only doing Montessori gifts this year." I pretended to understand. I placed it on the shelf. The baby smiled. He liked the wheels. That was enough for me. I didn't say a word when she moved it out of his reach. That was always her way. She never shouted. Just rearranged everything so quietly that you'd think you had misplaced your worth yourself. That's what made it worse. It's easier to fight someone who is loud, someone who's cruel in obvious ways. But she did it with smiles, with soft tones, with rules that were never spoken but always enforced. And my son, he just watched. Stood there letting his wife clip the strings of the woman who stitched him together, so when she said it at dinner, when those words landed, "Don't embarrass us," it wasn't just one moment. It was the echo of every small dismissal, every quiet humiliation, every invisible wall they had built around themselves. I had just never named it until then, but now I had. And once you give something its name, you can finally walk away from it. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The apartment was quiet, as always. I sat on the edge of the bed, robe tied tight at the waist, hands resting in my lap. For a long time, I didn't move, just stared at the little crack in the wall near the window. I'd been meaning to fill it, but never had. It's funny how small things stay broken when no one else sees them. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the steam rise. The chair across from me was empty, but I imagined her sitting there, still wearing that smile. Polished, practiced, saying things like, "We didn't mean it that way. You're taking it too personally. You're too sensitive." That's always the phrase they use when they don't want to admit the wound came from them. I took my tea to the living room. pulled out the notebook I'd been keeping, the one with the brown cover and soft pages. I ran, my hand over the front for a while before opening it. Inside were just words, small, harmless words. But together, they told the truth. December 12th, she asked me not to bring food anymore. Said it created pressure. January 8th, I offered to babysit. She said they had someone more aligned with their values. March 3, I brought flowers. She didn't like the smell. Nothing. Huge. Nothing someone could point at and say, see, this was the moment. But that's the thing about slow erasure. It's done in whispers, not shouts. I flipped through the pages until I found the last entry. The night before, April 6th, don't embarrass us at dinner. That sentence sat alone. I'd underlined it once, then again. The pen had pressed so hard, it nearly tore through the paper. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on it like I was holding something sacred. I didn't cry. I thought maybe I should, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to the hall closet and pulled down the old box with the files. Birth certificates, bank copies. The deed to the little plot of land I'd inherited from my mother, the one no one in the family ever asked about. I kept it quiet all these years. A backup plan, though I never thought I'd need it. I opened the drawer where I kept the spare keys, found the one labeled storage. I hadn't been there in months. But that morning, I put the key in my coat pocket, along with my driver's license, a flash drive, and the printout of my updated will. I'd revised it 6 months ago, after the baby's 2nd birthday. No one had come to pick me up. I watched the celebration through a few posted photos and a blurry live stream someone forgot to turn off. I'd revised it in silence, removed names, added a trust in my own name, set aside money for someone they didn't know. I'd written every word carefully without emotion, like packing a suitcase for a journey I didn't yet have the courage to take. That morning, started packing for real. I folded clothes slowly, not many, just what I'd need. I packed the soft sweater I wore the night my son told me he was going to propose. The one he used to say made me look warm, like home. I packed the old framed photo of us at the beach, his little hands in mine, both of us squinting into the sun. I wrapped it in a scarf. I packed my notebook. I left the apartment around 10. The sun had climbed higher, but the chill hadn't lifted. I stopped by the bank, signed a form, transferred accounts, moved a small sum to an account under a different name, a name I hadn't used in years, a mother's maiden name. The clerk didn't ask why. She just stamped the papers and smiled, said, "Have a nice day." I went to the storage unit next, opened the metal door and stood in the dust, smelled of old books and cedar. I found what I needed, a small suitcase with wheels, the kind they call carry-on. It still had the tag from the last trip I took with my sister before she passed. I dusted it off. Inside the unit were small things I hadn't been ready to give up. A jewelry box, letters in my son's handwriting from when he still called me Mama, a music box that played Moon River. I left most of it untouched, not because I didn't care, but because some memories are too loud to carry. By late afternoon, I was on the road. Not far, just far enough. I didn't want revenge. I wanted air. I wanted a room with a lock, a chair that held only my weight, a table with no rules, a night where no one told me to be less. I found a motel off the main highway. Nothing fancy. Beige walls, faded curtains, a quiet hum from the old refrigerator in the corner. I unpacked slowly, hung my coat, laid the notebook beside the bed. Then I sat, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed without waiting for someone to speak after me, without bracing for correction. Without shrinking, I called no one. I didn't text my son, didn't leave a note. They'd notice soon enough, but by then I would already belong to myself again. That night, I lay down under the stiff motel sheets and stared at the ceiling. I whispered something to the dark. It was not a prayer. It was not a wish. It was a promise. I woke up just before dawn. The air in the motel room was cold, but not uncomfortable. Still, I stayed under the covers for a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car outside on the highway. It was the first morning in years where no one expected anything from me. No texts, no calls, no hovering sense of being watched or judged. Just stillness. I sat at the edge of the bed and pulled the notebook into my lap. The brown cover was worn now, soft where my fingers had touched it too many times. I opened it to a blank page. April 7th, I left. No note, no call. Just me. That's enough. I closed it, then placed it carefully in the drawer beside the bed. I wasn't done writing, but for now the silence said more than ink ever could. I brewed the motel's bitter coffee and drank it slowly by the window. The sky was the color of wet ash. I thought about how strange it felt to sit and watch a sunrise. Alone, not because I had nowhere else to be, but because I'd finally chosen it. Later that morning, I drove to the little town nearby. It wasn't much, just a row of shops, a diner with flickering neon letters, the library tucked between a florist and a pharmacy. I walked slowly, letting the wind press against my coat. It reminded me I still existed, that I had edges, that I hadn't been erased. I stopped at the hardware store and bought a padlock for the motel suitcase, even though there was nothing particularly valuable in it. Still, something about securing my things made me feel stronger. Like I was drawing a boundary, finally. One only I had the key to. Next door was a print shop. I stepped in and asked if they could scan a few documents: my revised will, the property deed, the guardianship papers for myself in case of illness. The man behind the counter asked if I needed help mailing anything. I said not yet. I left with a USB drive and 2 crisp envelopes. Everything I needed to protect what was mine fit into the small zippered pocket of my bag. For lunch, I sat alone at the corner booth in the diner. The waitress was kind, not overly chatty. She reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place, maybe myself 20 years ago, when I still smiled easily. When she brought the check, she said she liked my earrings. I touched them out of habit, small gold hoops. A gift from my son years before she came into the picture. Before birthdays became group texts and hand-me-down cards, I thanked her. That was all, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. A stranger saw me, not as a burden, not as a shadow. Just a woman, sitting with quiet dignity. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the motel room, organizing papers. I created folders, labeled them in neat handwriting, something my husband used to tease me about. You and your tidy little worlds, he'd say. I wonder what he'd think now that I had built this one, finally, without permission. I lit a candle. I'd bought from the pharmacy, a small one, lavender scented. Its flame was steady. I watched it dance and thought of all the times I had dimmed my own light so that theirs could shine without reflection. Now was reclaiming what flicker I had left that evening. I turned off my phone. I knew the messages would come eventually, the missed calls, the confusion, the guilt disguised as concern. But tonight I didn't owe anyone my voice. Instead, I sat down and began writing something more deliberate. Not in the notebook, but on lined paper, a letter not to them, but to myself. I wrote slowly, each word a kind of stitching. You are not too much. You are not a mistake. You gave, and they mistook it for emptiness. You are not empty. You are full of memory, strength, of soft fury. You are still here. And that is everything. I folded the letter and placed it inside the pocket of my coat. Not for mailing, just for safekeeping. For those mornings when the silence would feel too wide and I might forget who I am. I didn't cry, not even once. It wasn't that I didn't feel grief, I did. It ran through me like a river that had changed its path. But I was learning too. Let it move without dragging me under. That night, I lay on the bed with the window open just enough to let the night sounds in. Crickets, distant cars. A dog barking somewhere down the road. I thought of my son as a child. The way he used to press his face into my neck when he was scared. The way he once told me I was his favorite person in the whole wide world. That child is gone. Not lost, just changed. Molded by someone who looked at me and saw an inconvenience instead of a foundation. But I didn't leave out of anger. I left because I had finally remembered myself. And sometimes, that's the quietest kind of revolution. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone. That was the point. For once in my life, I didn't leave breadcrumbs. No messages to follow, no trail to lead them back to me. It felt strange at first, like I was doing something wrong. It's like disappearing required permission. But the longer I stayed gone, the more right it felt. I visited the post office that morning, rented a box under my new name, paid for 6 months in cash. The clerk looked at me the way people sometimes do when they're not sure if they're supposed to ask more questions. He didn't. I was grateful for that. I also stopped by the public library, registered for a card, browsed the fiction aisle without any real purpose. Just touching the spines of books made me feel human again. Not someone's mother, not someone's burden, not a fixture in the background. It's just a woman with a name and time on her hands. On the way out, I passed a bulletin board. Local services, piano lessons, someone selling used furniture. I saw a small note handwritten, taped at an angle. Retired teacher looking for like companionship or walking partner. I smiled, folded the corner of the paper back, but didn't take it, not yet. I wasn't ready to be known again. Back at the motel, I opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out the notebook. April 8th, they'll be wondering where I am by now. But wondering isn't the same as worrying. And worrying isn't the same as caring. I wrote that line. Then stared at it for a long time. I kept thinking about the last time they asked how I was doing, not just out of habit, but with genuine curiosity. I couldn't remember. Most of our conversations had become logistics, times, dates, pickups, drop-offs. I had become the filler, the spare tire in their lives, useful only when needed, then forgotten again. I made a list that day, not of what I'd left behind, but what I had taken with me. It's my documents, my clothes, my peace, my dignity, my breath, my time, my silence. My voice. Funny how silence and voice can both be yours at the same time. I ordered a small safe to be delivered to the post office box address. It's a place to store the deed, the updated will, the other papers I was preparing. Things that once lived in drawers they never asked about. I knew if I were to ever lose my memory, I wanted the record to be clean, uncluttered mine. I sat with my tea that afternoon, watching a couple check into the room next to mine. They looked tired. Their conversation drifted through the thin walls, nothing dramatic. Just small irritations between people who had stopped listening to each other. I thought about how many years I spent with people who didn't hear me. How I mistook endurance for love, silence for safety. How I shrank to keep the peace. Then one day realized the peace had never included me. That evening, I took a walk down a trail behind the motel. It wasn't much, just a narrow path with patches of wildflowers and a rusted bench overlooking a dry stream. But the sky was open. That alone felt like a kind of grace. I sat there until the sun dipped low, turning everything gold and soft. I thought about my name, the one I was born with, the one before I was Mrs. Anyone, before I was Mom, before I was someone's story to manage. My first name had always been mine, but the rest they'd built a version of me that no longer fit. A version I had outgrown. When I got back to the room, I found my phone flashing on the dresser. 6 missed calls. 3 from my son, 1 from his wife. 2 from an unknown number, and a single text. "Where are you?" I didn't reply. There was no anger in me, just distance. Clear, cold distance. I turned off the phone again and placed it in the drawer. That night, I dreamed I was walking down a long hallway full of locked doors. Every time I passed one, I could hear voices behind it, some familiar, some not. But I didn't try any of the handles. I just kept walking. In the dream, I wasn't afraid, just free. When I woke up, the air in the room felt different, lighter. It hit me then I hadn't thought about them with guilt all day. Not once. I hadn't wondered if they missed me. I hadn't worried whether they were telling people I was unstable or difficult or selfish. I had finally stepped out of the frame they kept me in, and for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to get back in. The voicemail started piling up by the second evening. At first, it was just him, my son, his voice too calm, like he was trying not to sound alarmed. Said he just wanted to check in. Said they noticed I'd left early from dinner and hadn't responded since. Said maybe my phone was off by mistake. I listened in silence, then deleted it. The next one came later, shorter, tighter, a bit of edge underneath the concern. Wanted to know where I was, if I was safe. Then, as if reading from a script, he added, "We're worried, but worry wears many faces." I'd seen them. I listened without flinching. Deleted that one too. The third voicemail came from her. Her voice was a kind of syrup sweet, but too thick. Said she hoped I wasn't upset that the dinner had been a little chaotic, and maybe some things came out wrong. Said she was sorry if I felt misunderstood. She didn't say sorry for what she said, just sorry that I felt something about it. That's not an apology. That's performance. I turned off the phone again. By the next morning, I had 10 missed calls. More voicemails, few texts. One from my grandson's school number. I knew they were trying every path in. I didn't open a single message. Didn't listen past the first few seconds. They weren't looking for me. They were looking for control. I left the motel for a few hours that afternoon. Walked through a small antique shop near the outskirts of town. The woman behind the counter had silver hair and eyes like mine, tired but still clear. We spoke softly. About old things. About clocks that no longer tick but still matter. I bought a porcelain dish with chipped edges. It reminded me of myself. It's beautiful, not in spite of the cracks, but because of them. Back in the room, I placed it on the windowsill and set a piece of folded paper inside. A list of things I am not. A mistake, a burden, a background character too sensitive, forgettable to lady read it out loud once. Whispered. Like a spell. By evening, they had moved to a new phase. Panic. My son called 7 times in a row, back to back. A rhythm I remembered from when he was small and got separated from me in a store. But this wasn't that. This wasn't about love. This was about confusion, about losing something they didn't realize could walk away. I imagined them talking in the kitchen, her pacing, him rubbing the back of his neck, saying things like, "This is ridiculous. She'll be back. It's just being dramatic." But I wasn't. That's the difference. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a release. That night, I finally listened to one full voicemail. Just one. It was him. He said he didn't understand. That he didn't remember anything offensive happening. That he thought we'd all had a nice evening. He said maybe I was taking things the wrong way. Then his voice cracked slightly. He said he missed me. I almost cried, but not for the reason he'd think. I didn't cry because he missed me. I cried because no longer missed him the same way. That kind of shift doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly. Like setting down a bag you didn't realize had been digging into your shoulder for 20 years. I stayed quiet the next day. A post appeared on her social media account. A photo from the dinner. "Everyone's smiling," caption said. "Family is everything." I stared at it for a long time. I was cropped out of the frame. Not by accident. Not by oversight. The corner of my sleeve had been visible in the original. Now it WASN, single quotes T. It was like I had never been there at all. That should have shattered me. Maybe a year ago it would have. But now it only confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't lost me that night at dinner. They'd been letting go of me for years. Little by little, smile by smile. Until the only version of me they tolerated was one who didn't speak unless spoken to. One who didn't wear bright colors or bring up old stories. One who didn't bring casseroles or offer to hold the baby too long. One who sat quietly in the corner and left without being asked. But I had finally stopped playing that role, and now they didn't know what to do with me. I turned off the phone again. For good this time. Removed the SIM card. Tossed it in the motel trash, wrapped in a tissue like something expired. I opened the notebook again. April 10th, they are unraveling. Am not. Let that be the difference. Later, I went to the diner again. The same booth. The waitress remembered me. She asked if I wanted the same tea. I nodded. She smiled. No questions. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams. Just breath and quiet and the sound of wind outside like waves pulling away from shore. It was the kind of sleep you only get when you stop waiting for someone else to say, sorry. It didn't take long to slip into a rhythm. I woke early. Brewed tea on the little hot plate I bought from the hardware store. Wrote in my notebook before speaking a word aloud. Then I'd walk, sometimes to the edge of town, sometimes just to the bench behind the motel where the trees stood still like old. Companions who didn't need me to explain anything. People began to recognize me not for who I had been, but for who I was now. The man at the library waved when I came in. The woman at the pharmacy set aside my usual cough drops without me asking. The diner waitress, who I now knew was named Mel, always brought me an extra napkin. These weren't grand connections, but they were gentle ones. The kind that didn't require performance. One afternoon, while browsing the back of a thrift store, I met a woman named Joyce. She was holding a worn-out paperback with the cover torn clean off. We both reached for the same candle on the shelf and laughed softly when our hands bumped. She told me she'd just moved to town after a long marriage she no longer recognized herself inside. I told her I was just passing through, but maybe not in such a hurry. We sat outside and shared a cup of coffee in the wind. She didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just listened when I spoke, and that was enough. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone did that without trying to fix me, defend someone else, or twist it into advice. Joyce said she walked every morning by the lake at the edge of town. Asked if I wanted to join sometime. I told her maybe. I walked back to the motel feeling something I hadn't in weeks seen, not watched, not monitored. Seen. That evening, I took out a second notebook, this one with a green cover. I titled it, New Things. I wrote down Joyce the Lake, the smell of clean sheets that aren't mine, my voice, peace, quiet peace. Quiet peace. The calls had stopped by then, the messages too. Imagine they were shifting gears, reworking the narrative, saying things like, she's unstable, or we've done all we can. I could hear her voice in my head. She's always been sensitive. Let them say it. They needed a version of me that made sense to their story. I no longer needed to fit inside it. I went to the post office one morning and mailed a copy of my new documents to a lawyer I trusted back in the city, sealed and certified. Inside, I wrote a short note in my careful, looping script. Please do not release to anyone without my signed instruction. These are mine now. I felt like I was handing over the reins of my own life, not to someone else, but to myself. My hands were steady when I sealed the envelope. That night, Joyce and I met again. We sat by the lake, neither of us saying much at first. The water was still. She pointed to a little house across the bank and said she might try renting it once the weather warmed up. She turned to me and said, "It's funny how long it takes to realize you are starving." I looked at her and nodded. "It's funny how long you keep swallowing." She smiled. The kind of smile women give when they know. Really know? After she left, I stayed a little longer by the water. The moon had risen, casting its reflection over the lake like a silver stitch in a torn piece of cloth. I remembered rocking my son by a window once when he had a fever, his forehead pressed to my shoulder, his tiny hands curling into my sweater. He had cried until he fell asleep, and I held him long after. Not because he needed it, but because I did. There had been so much love, so much sacrifice, so much stitching of other people's wounds while my own went unattended. But now, here, I was Alone, but not lonely. Solitary, but not erased. That night, I wrote one more line in my green notebook. I do not need to be found. I am not lost. And I meant it. The letter came on a Tuesday. No return address. Just my name spelled correctly, in handwriting I hadn't seen since the last birthday card he bothered to sign himself. I sat with it unopened on the nightstand for most of the day, just looking at it. My name on that envelope felt like a question. A hand half extended, too late. I didn't rush. I swept the floor, made soup, went to the library, and returned a book I hadn't finished. I didn't owe the letter my immediate attention. I owed myself the stillness first. When I opened it, it was shorter than I expected, just a few lines, folded neatly. He said he'd been trying to call, that he didn't know what he did wrong, that he missed me, that he was sorry if anything, had been misunderstood. That was the word again, misunderstood. It hung in the middle of the page like an accusation in disguise. I set the letter down. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger anymore. It's just a soft kind of sorrow, like hearing a song you once loved playing from a room too far away. A few days later, another envelope arrived. This one had her handwriting. It was longer, meandering. She said she was sorry for how things might have come across. She mentioned the dinner, said she had been stressed, said I must have misinterpreted her tone. She hoped we could talk soon, for the baby's sake. For the family's sake? There it was again. It's the invitation wrapped in pressure. It's the apology braided with self-preservation. They were unraveling, and I was not. I sat down and drafted a reply. Not to send, it's just to see if I had anything left I needed. To say the words came slowly. You made me invisible in my own life. And now you want me to return so you can smooth over the space I left. I am not angry. But I am not coming back to the version of me you remember. That woman is gone. I folded the paper and placed it under the porcelain dish on the window ledge. Later that week, Joyce knocked on my door. She held a bag of oranges and said the vendor down the road had extras. We drank tea on the bed, knees close. She told me about her daughter, how they'd grown apart after her divorce. How sometimes silence is the only language that protects both people, she said. You don't have to forgive them to be free. I looked at her, the oranges still in her lap. I already am, said. We sat a while longer, no more words needed. When she left, I peeled one orange and placed the pieces carefully on a napkin, sweet tart alive. That night, I dreamed I was in my old house, the one with the cracked kitchen tile and the tiny window above the sink. My son was small again, playing with wooden blocks on the floor. He looked up at me and smiled, but when I knelt beside him, he stood and walked away without turning back. Out the door. Into light, I woke with my chest aching and my hands open. It wasn't grief, it was release. I took the letter he'd written and placed it in my green notebook. Then I lit a small match and burned the paper I'd written in reply. Watched it curl and vanish in the porcelain dish. There would be no reply. Not because I wanted revenge, but because silence was the last clean thing I had left to offer. It's been 42 days since I walked out of their house. I counted each one without meaning to. Not like a sentence being served, but like a slow unfolding, a petal opening, a self-returning. The motel room is still mine, though I no longer feel like a guest inside it. The beige walls have softened into familiarity. The tea kettle hums, like it knows my rhythm. The bed creaks in the same spot when I sit down each night to write in my green notebook. I wrote something in it this morning. I am no longer living in the waiting room of someone else's love. It felt like a final truth, one I didn't need to underline. The calls stopped after the second letter. No more messages. Oh, no more guilt dressed up as concern. It was as if they had moved on, or convinced themselves I would come back eventually, that I'd show up on a holiday, or after enough silence had passed. But I won't, because I didn't leave to be chased. I left to be whole. I haven't told Joyce everything, but she knows enough. We walk around the lake in the mornings now. She brings stale crackers for the ducks, and I bring 2 apples, one for her, one for me. We don't talk much about our pasts anymore. We speak in gestures. She hands me a scarf she found on sale. I save her a seat at the library talks on Thursday nights. We hold space for each other. It's the way women do when they've stopped asking permission to exist. A few days ago, she asked if I'd seen the cottage near the bend in the trail, the one with the chipped blue fence. I had. She said it's for rent. Cheap, too. If someone is quiet and pays on time. I smiled, told her I'd think about it. But I already knew that afternoon I walked there alone. The house was small, but full of light. A wide window in the front, a stove with just 2 burners, a porch with room for 1 chair. I stepped onto the grass and closed my eyes. The wind brushed against my face like something familiar. Something not asking anything of me. I signed the rental papers yesterday, paid the first month in cash. The key is in my pocket now, warm against my palm as I sit here, recording this for myself. I've been thinking about that dinner. The moment her words landed, it's like a stone in my chest. Don't embarrass us at dinner. It echoes less now, not because I've forgotten, but because I've reclaimed the air around it. That moment was not the beginning of the hurt. It was the end of my pretending, and I owe her that in a way. Not thanks, but clarity. I've stopped asking why they did what they did. I've stopped needing them to see me, to understand, to say the words that should have been said long ago. The silence I carry now isn't empty. It's chosen. It's peace. I've started cooking again, for myself this time. Real food. With flavor, with salt and onions and garlic and spice. I eat it on the porch sometimes, barefoot, watching the light change on the grass. No one corrects me. No one tells me what I should or shouldn't do. I am not too much. I am not wrong. I am not shameful. I am here, and I am mine. A few nights ago, I took the old photo of my son and me, the one from the beach, the one I packed in the scarf. I looked at it for a long time, his tiny hand in mine, the sun in our eyes. I kissed it gently once, then folded it and placed it in a wooden box I keep beneath the bed. Not to throw away, but to honor. I loved it deeply. I gave everything. And now I choose not to give what's left to those who cannot hold it with care. Tomorrow I move into the cottage. Joyce says she'll help me carry the boxes. We'll put the porcelain dish on the windowsill. I'll plant mint in a chipped pot by the door. Hang my green notebook on a nail in the kitchen. Not as decoration. As proof. As memory. As testimony. This is the last thing I'll record in this motel room. I don't know if I'll listen back to it. Maybe someday, maybe not, but I wanted to say it out loud at least once. I walked away not because I was weak, but because I was no longer willing to disappear politely, and this time, I decide who gets to call me anything else. The end.